Hello and welcome to the Tuesday, December 15th meeting of the Finance Committee. Pursuant to the Governor's order suspending certain provisions of the Open Meeting Law, General Laws, Chapter 30A, Paragraph 20, as well as the Select Board's emergency order dated March 16th, 2020, the Finance Committee will be using remote participation for this meeting. The audio of this meeting is being recorded and will be posted to the town's webpage within 24 hours in accordance with the Governor's emergency action requirement of keeping the public informed of actions during this meeting. I would ask that all participants remotely attending this meeting please state your name for identification purposes each time you speak throughout the meeting. This time I will take a roll call of attendance. Mr. Maxwell.
Here.
Ms. Nersessian.
Here.
Mr. Whitaker.
Here.
Ms. Zemer.
Here.
Mr. Alfred.
Here.
Mr. Murphy.
Here.
And of course, I am here both in spirit and in actuality. So we'll begin. First up on the agenda is administrative stuff. And the one thing I was going to say about that is I know that we have several minutes. We have about 5 sets of minutes now. I started going through them today to make the first edits with Mark. I will have all of those ready for our next meeting for sure. So they'll be sent out ahead of the next meeting, but we'll do the votes on them next meeting. Mark, if you could do me a favor and send me a list of just to make sure I'm reviewing. I wasn't sure how far back to go because I couldn't remember where we were. So just send me a list of the ones that need to be cleaned up, and I'll make sure I take care of those in the next day or two and get them back to you for distribution. Okay. Other than that, there's nothing much to say on the administrative side. Obviously, town meeting was short, quick, and accomplished the objectives we needed to, which is getting everything done so that the tax rate could be set, but I'll leave that for the town administrator to deal with. Okay. Other than that, as I said, I haven't seen anything. Of course, I haven't been by town hall, but I haven't heard or gotten pinged by Sharon about anything that needs our attention. So let's just go right into the updates from Travis. So Travis, go ahead.
Okay, so I had sent out that the tax rate did get set. I think it was the Wednesday after town meeting, so that was good. We didn't have any issues. We were a little concerned if DLS wasn't going to turn it around in time because everybody was a little mad rush at the end there, and we needed to get tax bills to the printer this week to hit our deadlines. The state did not extend the statute of when tax bills needed to go out. So we were under the gun a little bit. But anyway, they turned it around in 3 hours, which I don't think I've ever experienced before. So testament to Sharon and Mary and Kathy. And I did send that out to everybody. So if there were any questions on that, I could take it. Otherwise, just a couple updates. Obviously, we'll have executive session for some things, but for major updates, some of the things that were passed on the larger items like especially the CPC projects. We're preparing the IFBs, the invitation for bids. Those are being reviewed by council, and they'll be posted soon for like the town hall floors upstairs and the windows and those sizable projects. Some of the smaller ones we had already received quotes on, so we can go ahead with. The steps to the left of 1750 are getting started this week. So, sort of managing everything, all of the projects that got approved through that process are sort of going off at different speeds here. I'm just trying to think of one other thing I wanted to mention. I mentioned to the FinCom last night. I know this is something that's been on your radar, is the Dude Solutions, that we're still in the process of getting that rolling up, and we think there's going to be a lot of info to come to you. But one thing that's developed is we had the opportunity to put together some projects for Maya. They have a grant program on an annual basis. And one of the things that we put forward to them was offsetting the cost of Dude Solutions. So it's already in the budget. So it's not going to, it's going to save taxpayer dollars. That money will roll back at the end of the year. They approved $10,000 of our Dude Solutions to be covered by a Maya grant because they see that as protecting us against liability by maintaining our capital assets. So that just hit last week. That was good news. And I think everything else I would cover later, unless there were any follow-up questions to town meeting. But I know some of those will be, you'll be discussing through the model. So I think that's it for the moment.
Okay. Good. Thank you, Travis. Any other liaison updates? There hasn't been much liaison activity. Go ahead, Michelle.
Just some good news. The Board of Health got a $3,000 grant. I can't remember. I talked to someone this morning and I got an email and I can't remember if it's MAHB or MHOA, but a $3,000 grant to cover more money for the visiting nurse that'll cover for next year when there's no CARES money, and also a $1,000 grant for not cash, but for equipment for signage and things. That was good news.
Good. Every little bit helps.
Yeah.
Anybody else have liaison updates? Okay, and we'll keep moving forward because we're going to have some more serious discussion later on in the meeting. Okay, Chief Cassidy, I see you're on. Do you want to give us the COVID update in terms of the financial aspects, as well as the general trends?
Yeah, no, the trends are not very positive. Like most other communities in Metro West and the rest of the Commonwealth, cases continue to increase. Since I've been with your committee last, we received some updated information from the Board of Health. So our known COVID-related fatalities went from 2 to 6, but those were actually data corrections for deaths that had occurred several months ago. So it's not that there was a recent spike in deaths, it's just we recently became aware of them. With regards to the financial implications, we're on track to finish up on the municipal side, spending the $1.3 million from administration finance, and we'll be wrapping that up in the next couple of weeks because we need to obligate all of those funds by the 30th.
Yeah. Speaking of which, Travis, did we end up getting the unemployment pieces submitted for that?
So the select board approved 147,000 for that. So that's going to be, obviously the first half of the year. And so as we had discussed as a group previously, with what we did at special town meeting, we'll have about $200,000 for the second half of the fiscal year, which I think based on projections will cover us. Hopefully by that time, we'll have some clarity and some fixes, especially on the fraud. So Maya, MMA, a few different groups that represent municipal interests have stepped up. We have all of our staff every time they have any webinars or those types of things where we're included. We're sharing our data as much as we can from a privacy standpoint to make sure that we're represented, and hopefully the fix will come soon and that will help us monetarily. If it does not happen before the end of the fiscal year, though, I think we're covered. So the 147 was approved out of the 1.3 million CARES Act, as the chief mentioned. Right now, the plan would be for the final, all decisions through the select board to be made next Monday night, with the idea that we would not hold a 12/28 meeting for the select board. If we need to, they're prepared to, if we're not able to close it out on Monday. But the chief is working with Keith Bidet on the school side to make sure everything is, the back and forth between those two pots of money, the 1.3 on the town side, the 600 plus on the school side, is properly accounted for. And we'll discuss sort of the last remnants of it as we get to the end of the calendar year.
Okay, good. So back to Chief, anything money-wise? I know we just heard that you both gave us the CARES update, but are we still good PPE-wise? I ask the same question every week, right? With the trending cases going higher, are we still good on supplies? We anticipate any expenses, and what if no stimulus comes through, that kind of thing?
Yeah, we're still in real good shape with regards to our PPE, both what we have on hand, as well as the fact that I still have a federal grant that I received that the period of performance goes through next August. So, we can wrap up the CARES stuff, and then sometime between January and August, I can order some more PPE based on that grant. But I'm trying to make sure that I'm keeping all of my transactions separate so that there's a clear distinction. But, if we have additional needs in the future, we do have the ability to acquire more.
Okay, go ahead, Travis, you had something?
Chief, could you just, last Friday we had the facilities manager use some equipment that the chief has procured. So we've been, as needed, having deep cleans, quote unquote, if there's anything resembling a hit. We now have some equipment that allows us to do something similar. We did that on Friday throughout the whole building. But if you could, I don't like to talk about the equipment, Chief, because you know it better than I do, but the fogger or however you call it, just, what we're prepared to carry on ourselves into the second half of the year.
So cleaning and sanitizing public buildings is a CARES eligible expense. We learned recently within the last couple of weeks that FEMA is going to be very stringent on how much of cleaning and sanitizing of public buildings they're going to be reimbursing through the Stafford Act reimbursement. Therefore, we're trying to make sure that not only for finishing up CARES between now and December 30th, but also moving forward for the post December 31st and moving forward period, that we really build capacity. And so instead of needing to be dependent on an outside vendor to come in every time we need to do a deep clean, that we have the equipment and supplies in-house. So looking to see the experience of what the schools have done, seeing some of the equipment that they have. Earlier in the year, I'd invested in a fogger for the police department because while the schools were closed, the police department had borrowed an electrostatic sprayer that the schools had. Once schools reopened, we needed to turn that back in. And so seeing that the police were having good success with it at their location, we picked up an electrostatic sprayer handheld for the facilities manager. And based on his success borrowing the police department's fogger, I also acquired one of those this past week so that moving forward, we'll have, as Travis indicated, the capacity to do a lot of these deep clean ourselves so that we don't always have to outsource that.
Okay. So one thing I was going to ask you, I thought about after our last conversation was, do we have a target supply that we keep in terms of, like a 3-month supply, 2-month supply type of thing? Because that's what got me thinking when we were seeing the increase in cases, right? We maybe we've sat here and said, okay, we have a 6-month supply, but now with the caseload going up, it may only last us, 3 months. And that's, so obviously I know you're aware of all this, right? But I'm just wondering what your thoughts are, how you're managing that, because I keep asking you the question only because of what happened in the beginning, right? Which was, people, governments fighting with each other to get $10 masks that were $1, right? So I'm just trying to make sure we are smarter than that. We have been in general, but that's why I keep asking about making sure we've got enough supply.
Sure. So the Fema guidance and what they'll reimburse for first responders is they will reimburse for a 60-day supply. Anything beyond 60, they're not going to deem eligible for federal reimbursement. But I can assure you that we currently have well in excess of a 60-day stockpile. So we're in very good shape.
Okay, good.
The governor also says the state has tons of PPE. I don't know if that's meant to also be used to distribute to municipalities or if it's just for the state. But
so the state has indicated that unlike back in the spring, when really they were the supplier to a lot of entities, because the supply chains have reopened, they are encouraging us to use our regular vendors and our regular supply chains, and that we should treat the cash that the state has as the point of last resort. So if we were to have a significant outbreak and we were completely out of something and every vendor that we called said, hey, yeah, I can get that to you in February, as a stopgap measure, the state would be able to provide us with a short-term supply, but they are not intending to be in the long-term acquisition and deployment.
Sure. I just meant, like, to Dr. Shade's point, the system is in better shape than it was in March. So even if we were to run out, there are backups that are in better shape than they were back in March.
Right. Obviously, we should be in better shape, but the bigger concern for me is just a simple supply and demand thing, right? It's one thing if when it was surging here initially, it wasn't surging in the Midwest, right? And so we were fighting with New York and New Jersey and other areas that were experiencing a surge. And that's my point was now that it's kind of spread everywhere and you're seeing the spiking generally going on countrywide. I was just wondering if there was the strains were starting to be felt in the supply chain. If not, then great. I mean, obviously, I don't want that to happen. So,
Yeah, I haven't seen the only strain right now on the supply chain are really with regards to gloves. But in terms of masks and gowns, those are very much in abundance. I can tell you that I've been to the state warehouse within the last 2 weeks, and there's a lot of stuff there, and I'm very comfortable that they're going to be able to be a stopgap measure for anybody who needs it. But again, if I order things today, I'll have them Thursday or Friday, the snowstorm notwithstanding. So we're in really good shape right now.
okay, good. Hey, Michelle, you had a question?
I was just wondering about the vaccine for first responders.
So the first shipment of vaccine, which is arriving in the Commonwealth, is targeted first to direct COVID-facing healthcare providers, which would be in the hospital setting.
Right.
The first responders are probably not going to be able to get their doses, probably based on the phone call I was on today with DPH, probably at least mid to late January, I would estimate, just in terms of the Pfizer vaccine, which received the emergency use authorization. That's what's arriving in the state right now, and those are going directly out to hospitals that have the ability to store them in the ultra cold storage. From there, the next round after direct COVID-facing healthcare providers is going to be congregate care settings, and that will be outsourced through the major pharmacies. So your CVS's and your Walgreens will be going to nursing homes and administering the vaccines to the residents and to the workers at the congregate care, which also will include corrections facilities. They haven't quite figured out who's going to be administering in the corrections facilities, whether it's going to be the pharmacies or whether it's going to be DOC medical staff. But after that allocation, and at that point, we will probably be then into shipments of Moderna after their EUA has been approved. So we're still at least a month out before first responders will be able to receive theirs.
Okay.
Okay. Anybody else have questions for the chief? Okay, then I guess thank you very much, Chief. We'll move on to our fun for the evening, the biggest issue of the night, which is let's start planning for FY22. Now, I will give you the background and where we are so far. I've obviously been talking to Travis to get the initial framework going so that we could start having this discussion tonight. Travis and I have talked several times in the last month or so. Obviously, with the town meeting coming up, we weren't spending a lot of time on FY22, but we started to have the discussions about how we were going to move forward in FY22. And I talked to Ben yesterday, and we worked, he created the new, we talked about the spreadsheet and just had it updated for FY21 so that we could start modeling FY22. And I'll boil it down. I'll share something here that will boil it down very quickly. I hit all the columns that we don't need to see for now. So let me just, do I have, I should have, I have co-host so I can share, right? So let me do this. This one, I believe is the right one. Okay, so you see the spreadsheet. This is, as I said, I hid all the extraneous data for right now, just to focus on what we need to do for tonight. The FY21 appropriation column should reflect what we appropriated at the last town meeting. Actually, no, at the July town meeting. So let me just double check. There were certain obvious things like the reserve fund. There it is, 600, yeah. So this does not have the appropriations from, it does have it in here, but it does not have them broken out into the individual departments, okay? So the way this is reflected right now, and this is just because of the way we get the source data from Sharon, we get the original appropriation data. She gives us the adjusted appropriation data, but that data is also confounded with things like transfers and other things that occur during the year. So rather than have to unwind those, we just started with the July data, and then all the money that we just appropriated for the salary adjustments and the things in the fall is included in this number down here for FY21. So this bottom line for FY21 reflects roughly where we are, okay? Modulo a few things like new growth where we're at the modeled number, not the actual number. But, you know, so to some extent, all these numbers up here that are guideline will change a little bit. But if you take out the, you know, we did the 190 into the reserve fund and the 100 into unemployment, right? So 290 of that 564, so roughly 300 was about 260, 270. So that's why this 250 is left here. I should actually make it like 270 to make it reflect. So this 270 number basically will get back annotated into the individual departments. But for guideline calculation purposes, we can just leave it at the moment as a lump sum article appropriation. Okay, that's the first thing. Now, what did I do? Travis sent out, you saw he sent out the tax rate recap, the numbers he was using and the numbers he projected for FY22. I took those numbers, I made some adjustments, and that's what we're going to discuss tonight, okay? There were a couple of adjustments I made, and Travis, you know, I didn't talk to you about some of these, I just made them an hour ago, but if you look at this, the things that I changed where I assumed an 8% increase in the overall benefits line, figuring that's, I don't know, I haven't gotten guidance from Mary yet on what she thinks or what the insurance people are saying, but that's typical, and I would expect it to actually be a little higher given the pandemic, that I'm guessing premiums are going to go up a little bit more next year because of the increased costs for, this certainly was not something they modeled in their cost last year.
They probably try to also keep it better for PR sake for a little while, and then they kill you in the following year.
Yeah, so anyway, so I just, and again, this is what the discussion is, right? So I put 8% in here. I obviously adjusted the tax levy for the 2.5 increase. Now, Travis in his model had 400,000 for new growth. I put it back to 325, but we can discuss that if we want to, you know, move our baseline up to 400, whether we want to leave it at 325 for modeling purposes. The only other adjustments I made were, the only other adjustment I made of any consequence was state aid. And this is, Travis, I went back after I saw your number where you said, okay, I assume 20% drop in UGA and flat Chapter 70. So I said, well, I agree with the 20% in UGA. And I was like, do I agree with the 70%? And again, this is for discussion. This is just my starting point. We'll discuss it as a committee and with you, Travis. I went back and I looked at what happened last time, right? The last recession. And Chapter 70 between 09 and 11 dropped almost 6%. So when I looked at that, I said, okay, that was over a 2-year period. It basically nominally dropped 3% a year for 2 fiscal years in the recession. And I looked at the fact that they level funded it, right? This gets back to the discussion we've had about they made FY21 whole by hook and by crook. And the question is, are we going to feel the pain more in 22 because of that? So I did nothing but matched the cut we saw in the last recession and said, okay, if we see that same drop in Chapter 70, that's a $465,000 hit. So I reflected that here.
Can you zoom in a little, Ken?
Okay, you can't. Okay, let's see. How am I gonna? Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll scroll down a little bit. I had it on one thing. I keep forgetting my monstrous monitor just gets scaled down for you guys.
Enough of the monitor size.
What?
Enough of your monitor size.
That's right. Hey, well. Yeah. Okay. So anyway, so can you guys read this now? This is so Travis. That's what I said. Travis had 10,090, 844 here, and I cut it back to 9,625. You know, netting out this 465. The offsets and charges Travis left them unchanged. I left them unchanged. So let's talk about this. Now, the first thing I want to say, just to be clear, because I don't want there to be any misinterpretation by anybody who's listening to this call, this meeting, which is I've already talked to Travis about the way things used to work with Paul, and I've told him maintain your own set of data so that we can use that as a check against our calculations, just like I did with Paul. So there's no requirement that the two of us agree, the two of us meaning the FinCom and the town administrator, if he wants to use a different model, he's free to use that. We're free to use whatever model we want. Obviously, to the extent we really want to agree so that we're working off the same base set of assumptions. But that's what this discussion is about. You can see that with the adjustments I made, right, and the 1 point, you again just change the number up here, 1.5% bottom line gets us to just barely surplus, right? Now, that's debatable, right? Do we cut the 465? Do we do an 8% increase here? I mean, but you see that these, this is what we have to have the discussion on. So go ahead, Dan. I see you're ready to start talking.
So this is a 1.5% across the board increase, right?
Yeah, this is a bottom line only. I'm excluding all talk of salary because there are contracts up for negotiation and things like that. So
right. But
let's just talk bottom line.
They're going up by 1.5%, and so they would have to fit that within
Yeah.
that. So.
Or we'd have to make adjustments later, like we've done in the past.
But then we're basically $80,000 surplus if we do it this way. So we're not also increasing capital funds. Which I think is the
And
appropriate.
your sound's fading in and out. I don't know if that's just me or not.
Better? I'll be close to the microphone. Is that better?
Okay.
No, you keep fading in and out.
Okay, so it's not just me. Okay.
No.
I don't know. It's showing that I'm.
Yeah. Now you sound fine.
Okay. It's probably my Wi-Fi. I think that thinking through this whole thing, I know we're being more conservative than certainly Travis was thinking, at least at the start, but the tune of $400,000. Going into this and really having as many unknowns as we do now, and as sort of almost as we have, I don't see why we wouldn't want to start at zero. And say that,
Why we wouldn't want to start with the bottom line of zero, you said?
With the bottom line of 0% increase year over year.
Okay, well that's
You're looking at me like I'm crazy.
I'm not looking at you like you're crazy. I'm just saying that. Okay, I know Travis, you wanted to say something too.
I was just going to say, let's plug in a couple numbers on the fixed cost that we know.
Okay.
So debt service, we know that $3 million should be $2,398,638.
Yeah, I hadn't gotten the numbers from Mary. So
All right. So retirement goes the other way on us.
Yeah.
So this one's going to go up based on the schedule plus extended day. I think we have to assume is probably not going to contribute the way they normally would. So the number I have based on water contributing and Metro West veterans contributing, but not extended day, would leave us at 2.52 million, almost flat.
okay.
And is there an offset in the excluded debt?
Yes, there is an offset in the excluded debt. So the total excluded debt down below is the 1.4. The total debt that goes in the budget is the 2.398. One other number, obviously you put the 8% for employee benefits. I'm not offended by that as a placeholder for now, but I would back out the 1.5 million in that budget to not increase it by 8%.
Okay.
So, that would bring it down.
Right.
Mary and I had discussed 6.5% on the employee benefit budget, not including the 1.5 million, which would have brought it to 7,843,000 was the number that we discussed earlier.
What's the 1.5 million? I missed that. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Yep. Well, yeah.
So those ones obviously are going to impact it. That's the number that Mary and I had discussed earlier. So those obviously impact the bottom line. And then I think that was it.
The other thing I want to check though, right? If you look at these two, right, the SBAB and the excluded debt, that's basically the entire 2.398 million. Does that mean that we have no more debt inside the limit, which I don't think is true?
No, the majority of our debt is all excluded. So what's going to happen is that 51. This is the last year that MSBA is going to be offsetting that debt. So that debt's going to sunset. And
Right, but what I'm saying is this debt number up here should be the sum of our excluded plus under the levy debt, right? And I'm saying if you look at these two numbers, the excluded debt and the SBAB reimbursement for that, right? This should be our total debt payment exclusive of these two.
excluded debt's not taking it out. It's going above the limit. It's increasing our ability to raise taxes.
Correct.
But we can double check. I think Mary copied you on that spreadsheet.
Yeah,
so-
let me, I'll go look it up. But the reason I say that is because this debt service number should represent all of our debt. And then we adjust for the excluded part by adding that in as revenue. And then we adjust for the SBAB by adding that in as revenue, right? So this should represent the total of all our debt payments. And then we adjust the offsets to that total debt payment from the levy perspective with these two numbers. And so I'm saying the sum of these two numbers basically equals this, which means that we're missing something. So I'll have to go back.
I would have thought that some excluded debt would have gone down as well.
The excluded debt goes down substantially as well. It goes from 1.8 to 1.4. Right, so that's going to be above the 2.5 levy limit. That is decreasing.
Right, but that excluded debt, this is why I said that excluded debt, for example, in this spreadsheet, this number drops by 400, but this number drops by 400 as well, right? It offsets completely because it's excluded. So 400 of this reduction should result in no net change to the bottom line, right? That's kind of what I'm saying, right?
Yeah.
So
what I was saying is, and you know, we'll have to get these numbers straightened away, but given the unknowns that we have, I don't know why we don't ask people to construct a zero budget and then allow, you know, any sort of steps and lanes that need to be taken to be sort of factored in and go above that 0% and essentially keep salary zero for now. And then what we can do is we can go back later as we get more information and we change the table and we do that sort of for people. It's not so much to say that we think that the end result will be a 0% on wages, but that, you know, for initial guidance, we want that the budgets to be built that way.
Right, and I'll be very clear about that. I didn't say that up front, but I've had that discussion with Travis already, right? That is exactly what we are going to do, right? We've talked about that and said, okay, because we have to wait and see, you know, again, you know, theoretically speaking, we'll get a governor's budget in January if they go back on the timetable they're supposed to be on, but they just finished a budget. I don't even know if I don't know if the governor's officially signed it yet, right? But my point is that, you know, it's very likely that we're going to see a sliding schedule for the state next year into the spring. And to that end, I agree. I think that the way we want to handle salary next year is to say to everybody, just use the FY20 number adjusted with any steps, right? Because Sharon's got to adjust for people that get steps during the year. And then we will go back, you know, we meaning when we make our recommendations, when Travis, you know, when the contracts are negotiated, whatever, we'll go back and say, okay, we're going to apply this to everybody's budget so you don't have to worry about it.
But so my point would be, if that's our recommendation, then we should also have a guideline or bottom line recommendation of zero, because we don't want people basically say, okay, well, the budget, the salary is zero, so I have all this extra money that I can do something with.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So let's. I'm going to stop sharing for a second so I can go look at this debt number. But let's hear what are the rest. What are you guys thinking in terms of what we want to? I mean, if we can come out of tonight with guidance for Travis to convey to the department heads on where we think how we think they should, the numbers they should be using to you know, formulate their budgets, then we're in very good shape in the sense that they can get started, right? The details can be filled in later, but you know, so is everybody else thinking we start with a baseline of FY20 and then, because the one thing I will say, Dan, is exclusive of the salary component, which we said we'll take care of later, we meaning town administrator, you know, and when we start crunching the numbers. But for things other than that, right? If you say 0%, then there are going to be cost increases, and that's okay, except that means that every budget we see is going to come in and say, okay, for level service, I'm going to need this much more money. Go ahead.
No, but almost all of these budgets are salaries, right? For the most part.
Well, for the most part, yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
maybe the due solution thing goes up a little bit. I mean, there'll be things here in the contract. I don't mean just due solutions, but I mean, there may be some contracts like that don't have escalators or something in them. But by and large, it's not going to be the driver of the increase.
Yeah. Well, can we chip in and get Dan a microphone so that we can actually hear
Yeah.
him?
Or Dan, could you call in on a phone?
Yeah.
You keep.
I don't know. Hold on, I'm going to reset my.
Okay, Sue, go ahead.
I don't think it's his internet. I actually think it's his microphone on his computer
Yeah, so do I, but that's
because it keeps coming in and out. But I would echo what Dan said. I would be in line with that because I think that there's too many unknowns at this point, and we're not done with this surge. And granted, hopefully the vaccine will help, but I still think that we're going to see struggles going into next year. And I think we've robbed Peter, and at some point we're going to have to pay Paul. So I think we're going to see the impact next year. We're going to have to.
Okay.
So I think until we know more, I think we should go very conservative.
Okay. Go ahead, Mark. You have your hand up.
It's a newbie question. Why not negative?
Yeah. As a practical matter, we can't effectively go negative unless we absolutely have to. Like, obviously, if there are significant revenue declines, then we have to go negative. But for the most part, the only way that the negative is going to be realized is going to be via, only at the margins. It's going to be people, right? And that's why we generally don't recommend that, because we don't want budgets to come in and say, okay, I'd cut this person if I had to, and then we say, oh, you don't need to cut them, right? There are a whole lot of implications to that. So
if I could just, Doug, can you hear me now?
yeah.
Yep.
It's actually I'm pretty sure it's my internet, but I would say, in guidance to Travis to give the department heads, if they have a contracted services, copier or servicing or something, and there's built into that contract an increase in price, build that into the number and see if they can find the offsetting savings somewhere else. But if not, come back with that number. But that's going to be a small, tiny piece of the overall budget that you'll end up going in and you'll see increases of 0.1, 0.2% or something like that. It won't be, anywhere, close to 1.5. What I don't want is to say 1.5 is the guideline, but 0 on salaries, and then have people go out and find ways of spending that 1.5 so that when we go and add the salaries in, it ends up being 2.5% that most budgets go up.
Okay. And by the way, just for the record, I did check on the debt, and Travis is correct. We have no in the limit debt starting in FY22. The only debt under the limit is water, and that's separate. So go ahead, Travis, and then I'll get to you, Vin.
Yeah, I guess my thought would be, there are serious repercussions, obviously, in a budget when all we're doing is increasing salaries with steps and not increasing the operating. We run into situations when we do that year over year where, departments are not going to be able to. We're going to have to talk about the service cuts that go with it, right? I mean, that's the conversation. Just holding it at 0 there is a further conversation to be had. I guess my point that we haven't really got into tonight would be schedule-wise, which is the state is not going to give us guidance until they're clear on stimulus that comes from the feds. There have been some rumblings that will be coming at some point. Obviously, there's an administration change that we're going to have to work through. This year, the town meeting based on schedule is a week later than it was last year. There's also the likelihood that the governor's orders will be in effect that would allow us to potentially move the meeting into June if we needed to. Rather than sending out suggestions or recommendations to department heads of how they should be putting together budgets, would it be better for us to be having this conversation in a couple of weeks and extending the timeline? We're obviously about a month behind this year because of changes to the fall town meeting. That's one thought to consider. Another thought would be, as departments essentially put together 1% last year and then put together a 0, would be asking them to put together 2 sets of requests, right? Here is a request at this number, and please specify specifically how you would get to this number, for example, and what potential service cut that would require. Obviously, as Ken mentioned, what we had discussed was, setting a COLA now is without the information would not work probably. So saying that information will be coming in the future. Here are the numbers based on what happened within 21, including what we did at special town meeting, any CBAs that have happened since then, and having those numbers updated. But if there were to be any adjustment for 22, we'd be looking to do that in the spring or, in the coming months. Does that make sense to do as a whole for this budget, considering that we all need some more information? And we may be able to flex the timeline if that works better for the town.
We certainly could do that. I think that, and again, this is a discussion we need to have, right? Part of me says if the plurality of the committee feels that we really don't want to be increasing things till we have a better picture, the way we can approach it is to say, okay, Sharon's going to give you a starting point that is your budget from this year, adjusted for what we know, like CBA or steps that will occur that we need to know about, but no COLA piece, because we'll add that later, right? Communicate that effectively, right? And that's a communication issue. Make sure that people understand that we're going to deal with that later because of the fluid situation. So it's not that we're saying a 0% COLA. We're saying we're going to deal with that when we have better clarity. And then say, okay, here's where you are right now. What are your known increases? What do you require for level service? Again, excluding the salary component, what do you require for level service? And then just say, bring us a budget that's a level service budget. And then, my concern is if you say, bring us a level service budget, and this is the discussion you and I had, Travis, right? Which is, if you say 0%, then every dollar over zero has to be justified, which it usually does anyway. But if you say something like, oh, it's 1%, and somebody sits there and says, okay, well, my electricity costs went up this much, and I can put that in here, and I can write, they have a target. I'm just wondering if we don't give them a target and you say, just give me a level service budget, will they just start adding a bunch of stuff in that we're going to have to take out? Or do we say, give us a level service budget so that we know the delta from zero that would take to maintain services? But it should be no more than, 1.5%. Or something like that, or whatever. I mean, again, I don't know. I'm just, Vin, you had a comment?
Well, I would lean towards throwing it back to the department heads. Basically, yeah, go and have them say 0 level service, but the goal is to get a 0, and anything over and above it, you're going to have to justify it. For example, like you said, the electricity. Well, show us, the trends. It is going up. Highly unlikely, but it could be. And so, okay, well, that's it. But understanding that we're anticipating big draconian cuts from the state. I know people think the feds are going to come in, but I don't know. I have my doubts. So we just be conservative and tell them, 0, try to level service with the intention we're going to ask you about everything over and above 0%.
Well, the other option, right? There is another option here, which is at a certain level, they prepare a budget request. But if we're basically saying we're going to deal with the salary piece, we meaning Travis and us, right? Because obviously we don't dictate the salary part, but we talk about the pool of money available for that. It's almost like you don't even need them to prepare a budget other than to say, okay, itemize the cost adjustments based on your run rates. What your cost, what your, in other words, don't say, tell us what level of service is. Say, look at your run rates right now and adjust every line to match your current run rates and give us that budget.
Well,
right? With known increases, right? If you know that something's going up,
Yeah. I mean, I think that makes sense.
And that makes it a very easy exercise for them, right? They just look line by line.
Right.
Go ahead, Dan. And Michelle, I'll get to you in a second.
See if everyone can hear me quickly. But that brings up, Ben brings up a good point, though. We need to make sure that when budgeting is happening, that people are not just looking at their number for the last fiscal year when things were shut down, like if they're looking at how much paper they consumed and such, and when no one was in the office or when the electricity was being used less. I mean, if we'll just say, hey, we're going to make these cuts to offset these other areas where they're increasing. So look, we didn't spend that much this year, so let's just bring it down there, because then we're going to be getting reserve fund transfers, later in the year. I'm sure, Travis, when you're working with the department heads on this, you'll be able to easily sort of help them do that.
Well, just remember, right, Travis is going to basically be doing most of the budgets or all the budgets, I presume, or working with the department heads on all the budgets for the select board oversight boards, right? It's things like the Board of Assessors, things like that, where other boards may need guidance.
A lot of times we compare to prior year spending, but we have to remember for certain items and certain consumables and things like that, that the prior year spending wasn't real because of the shutdown.
Well, yeah,
Yeah, electricity, heat, all that's going to be off this year because they were shut down. So I agree with Dan.
It's probably minor in each individual situation, but if you're used to ordering a ream of paper a box of paper every month, and you only ordered 9 of them this year, you still need 12 probably next year.
Yeah, well, that's why you should have to go back more than 1 year, right? And I've already had this discussion with Travis about cutting down on the end of year transfers by getting these run rates properly reflected in the budgets, right? So that's one improvement we hope to make. First of all, let me get to Michelle first. She's had her hand up for a while.
That's just what I was going to say, that we have to assume that on July 1st, when we give them this information, we have to assume that on July 1st, everyone's back full time. We just have to, I think, make that assumption for budgeting purposes.
Yeah, and one other thing with that, Michelle, is we also are going to need to make it clear that every department has to break out separately COVID-related expenses. For example, if I'm making up a case here, I don't know if this is really happening, but let's say the library right now is doing a deep clean every night or something like that, right? The amount that obviously reflecting their budget is going to be a hit next year, but we need to have that separated because if there is any stimulus, if there is any additional COVID funding, we have to be able to look at that and say, okay, this is how much of our budget is COVID-related expenses for both rings, right? One is for federal reimbursement, but also if hypothetically, let's say everybody is vaccinated and by January of 22, things are quote unquote back to normal, right? Then there's going to be money there that can be dealt with, can be on the table for other things. So,
right, it's going to be a transition year.
So let me ask a fundamental question. I'll get to you in a second, Travis. Very fundamental question, which is, do we want to resolve this tonight, or do we want to wait, like Travis says, and say, okay, we'll meet, first week of January, and say that's when we'll finish this and come to a conclusion, because that's important just from the point of what we're trying to accomplish tonight, right? If we need to walk out of here tonight saying, what do we tell the department heads, then we've got to have this debate and hash out tonight. If people want to go look at scenarios, then that'll take more time.
I'm open to waiting because I don't let others speak, but if I don't want to just wait and give people say that Travis shouldn't tell people anything, maybe give some guideline of where we're thinking, and I think I'm thinking along the sort of ways of Ben and everything is that 0% on salaries for now, although we hope obviously later that we'll be able to do some adjustments, and then start thinking about what they need for a level of service. We're not going to say level service right now. We'll see where things kind of come. But if you really want to start doing work on the budget right now, start sort of thinking about what that level service budget would look like and how much increase that would represent.
Yeah. Okay, so
number later.
It's really funny. It's like I feel like I'm like at a Grateful Dead concert listening to Dan.
I have a separate mic because I was having those same issues, Dan. I don't know if you want to confer with Chris Mayo.
Should we increase the FinCom budget by $20 to get Dan?
You guys have it in there if you need to get him a mic.
So.
No, I think I can splurge for a mic if I'll figure something out, or I can use headphones.
Okay, so go ahead, Travis. Then Sue. Go ahead, Travis.
Well, I just wanted to touch on the point before about the transfers because I know I talked about this with Ken. I just want to say it as a group. I think a few of these, right, especially the smaller ones that are ticky-tack stuff that we transfer at the end of the year, as we approach the 22 budget, but also just in the future. And I noticed this obviously on my first night of annual town meeting when the moderator was reading, took 20 to 30 minutes to read the budget. I think if we vote this in a more high-level manner, which is personal services, other expenses, and then capital outlay when appropriate per budget, it's going to, especially for 22, it's going to cause less issues. But, we still put together the budget line item by line item, but the way it's voted is just personal services operating. It's going to cut down on a lot of the end of year stuff that you guys as a group have to do between these budgets. What I'm talking about is, Board of Health, for example, has personal services, purchase services, supplies and materials, other expenses. 3 of those should be voted as one group, essentially. Whereas we continue to reflect the budget fully, it would be voted that way and cause less issues at the end of the year. I just want to make that point based on what you had said earlier. Thanks.
Okay, go ahead, Sue.
I had 2 questions. One was, are we going to know a lot more the first week in January if we postpone? And the second question, sort of going along with that, is sort of when is the last, like when do we have to formally decide to ensure we can sort of meet the timetable?
Well, from a timetables perspective, right? As Travis pointed out, town meeting's kind of late this year because of the way the calendar works. So it's May 10th, I believe, next year. So we effectively have another week. Okay. So the real thing behind this is our reviews, right? We have to start. We typically start reviewing budgets mid to, I'd say like about halfway to 2/3 of the way through January, usually the 2nd or 3rd week of January, and then we've purposely tried to go through everything by mid to late March because we wanted to give ourselves, again, because of the quote unquote press deadline and so forth, and the fact that we have to prepare all the materials, we wanted to give ourselves several weeks to go over the warrant, to do recommendations, to prepare the document, right? That's the timeline that dictates our activity, right? I don't think we will know a lot more when we get to January, like if we push out a couple of weeks. I think that if we want to, we could say tonight something like Dan was saying, which was, no, just kidding.
Is it better now, by the way?
That's right. Yeah, well, so far, you always say that and it sounds fine, and then as soon as you get one sentence in, it fades.
I have an AirPod, so.
But in any case, we could just say, prepare a budget that is level service, exclude all salary stuff because we'll deal with that later, and just do that and say prepare a budget request that just represents level service with FY21. And the only 2 things, this is why I pointed out before, you want to say level service, but you've got to say assuming what, right? Level service assuming a COVID environment or non-COVID, or do you want to say level service assuming non-COVID, and then give us a number for COVID-related expenses on top of that you're incurring now, or that you believe you will incur to handle, distancing, whatever requirements. So for most, as you know, for the bulk of the budgets, we don't want to get too far in the weeds because we know which budgets will take the most work, right? And, police, schools, the several big budgets that we have, Travis obviously is going to be working closely with the police chief on the police budget. We'll be through the liaison process working with the schools in terms of seeing where they're planning on ending up, things like that. A lot of these other budgets, right, there are things like, for example, streetlights, right? Travis is going to be making that streetlight budget. That has no salary in it. That's just a cost of electricity, right? So some of these quote unquote level service budgets are relatively easy and would allow us to get started on those like we usually do early, get those out of the way, and then focus our energies on the bigger ones. So, yeah. Tina, you had a comment?
Yeah, I don't want to cut off, though, the chance to hear from Tim. I don't know if he spoke yet. You'd asked for everyone's opinion, so if Tim had wanted to go ahead of me, then I'll save my comments, but I do have a few comments, yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay, so, it's a really interesting conversation, and I just wanted to share probably an opinion from myself more so, but I think it reflects probably some of the thinking of the board based on some of the conversations we've had in our meetings. I think there's a really strong intention to see a change to the FY22 budget process from the select board point of view, certainly from my point of view. Some of it is definitely in response to new leadership with Travis. Some of it is a course correction following the initial upheaval to the entire budget process that we all experienced with this state of emergency. But again, a strong intention to see this FY22 budget process go a little, a lot differently. Some of it, I think, is a course correction to, from my point of view at least, to direct taxpayer money back to the operating budget. I hear the comments about being conservative, the 0% because of the unknowns. I'm interested to hear what the Finance Committee has to say about the use of stabilization fund. We are talking about a situation that begins July 1st, 6 months plus from where we are today. Those unknowns become, more or less of an issue as we move through this pandemic, which is ever changing. So I'm curious to hear what the committee in time, not tonight necessarily, has to say about the use of stabilization for the unknowns. But I just wanted to make that point mostly on my behalf. And I think our board will have discussions, again, looking for change to the FY22 budget process compared to certainly my last year and probably the last couple of years. So I wanted to put that out there for consideration since you guys are starting the conversation about what FY22 is going to look like.
Well, I guess, Tina, the question I have is, what are you talking about vis-a-vis changes in the process?
Well, I think there are a couple of things. I mean, I think taking a look at free cash, the impact that has on the budget process, assumptions that are made. I think certainly looking at the type of funding we've seen for general government in general. So those departments, I think public safety is another area where we ought to be looking, we ought to be looking at spending over time and spending compared to like communities. I think that we hear a lot from the select board side of public concerns, public issues that come to our attention through public comment, through email forms and so on. And when I look to solutions, when I look to how to address those, I look to general government services. I look to staffing numbers, I look to the people who are in the positions, and I see, this is where the solutions lie in a lot of cases for these issues that come before the board. So, big picture, I'm not at this time ready or willing to get into minute details on that, but this is sort of the big picture from where I sit. I think it speaks to, again, the general board consensus, if I could say that on behalf of my board, of seeing this process go a little bit differently this year with a bit more of a focus on the operating budget. So I wanted to add that to the conversation.
Tina, it doesn't sound like you're really talking about process. You're actually talking about solutions. Are you suggesting using free cash to increase services in town?
I am not making that suggestion, no.
Then what were you talking about using free cash for?
Well, I mean, there are a set of assumptions that go into the budget guidelines. I think looking historically at where free cash has been helps to realign assumptions moving forward. That's my point.
I guess I would say I'm completely confused with what you're suggesting. I really, because free cash is underspent money, or additional revenue that come in that was sort of unexpected, not necessarily underspent money. And I don't.
Right.
Revenue above assumption. So we make assumptions on revenue, and when we make conservative assumptions on revenue, we generate free cash.
Right. But just to be clear, finance guidance from administration and finance, as a matter of fact, is to bias for close to 5% free cash, and we haven't hit that yet. Not that we're planning on hitting it, but I'm just saying that that's the you're supposed to bias for positive free cash because it is so variable and because it's considered good practice by the state. So,
and Tina, I would further say that the schools have been very vocal, over the years in their desire for us to play around with some of the revenue assumptions, because it's definitely been something that they would love to take advantage of. The problem is you start to change your revenue assumptions. You not only do you change the volatility of free cash, but you actually change the volatility from year to year of your budget, of your budgeting. If we were moving new growth expectations around every year, and you hit a cycle, and we had gotten it up to 800,000, and all of a sudden we thought it was going to get back down to 300,000. Well, now all of a sudden you've spent the 500,000 on sort of an annual operating basis that you're now having to take money out of. I think that we need to be very, very, very careful. Keep in mind what we did with free cash this year allowed us to do a lot of one-time things that really were needed, and spending on a lot of one-time projects, including studies that the select board was very interested in in doing. If you spent that money on operating on people's salaries and things like that, you end up taking a lot of flexibility away from doing a lot of things that I think we should talk more about this, but I think that the ramifications of this would probably be something that everyone wouldn't be happy with over time.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate everyone's comments, and mine was only to say that the board, and again, for me specifically, is looking for a conversation that looks and feels different this year. You asked for an example. I offered one. There are others. Again, I don't think the purpose of tonight is to get into the details in a really granular way. I just wanted to put out there that message from myself and to let you know rather that the select board will be taking an active role, as we always do, but this may be one of the lenses by which we look at the budget process.
Okay. So I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole. So what I would say is, thank you for your comment, Tina. I will point out that one of the things I think is very important that people understand about the Finance Committee versus the Select Board on something like this is very simple, which is the Select Board oversees many budgets in town, right? Oversees many departments. So they are a quote unquote user of the money, right? So are we. Technically, we have a tiny budget for administrative purposes, but as we exist because we are financially independent and basically don't have self-interest in the decisions that we make, right? And so my guidance to you would be and to your board would be the same that we give the guidance to any other board, which is if you feel there are services that you need to expand or things that need additional staffing and the like, that should be part of the budgets you present to us, right? You can bring the request. We have a facilities manager because of the request like that, right? So I want to be very careful because the budget process involves making requests and us making recommendations, right? And our recommendations, kind of the balances and checks have to be that our recommendations have to be our opinion of what we think is in the best interest of the town to recommend a town meeting. The select board obviously can request anything they feel they need, and we'll discuss that. Travis.
Fair enough. And I'm sorry, one last comment. I'm not here at all to challenge any of your role or responsibilities in the budget process. We will, as an executive board, work with the town administrator to prepare the warrant that will include the budget that goes into the warrant. And I'm just simply sharing a point of view.
Yep, that's fine. Travis?
So I think one of the points that Tina brought up, which, the stabilization and all of that, I think some of the things, and again, to the point that Tina made, it doesn't have to be tonight, but I think, for the 484 that went in stabilization and the select board comment under that, as well as the FinCom comment being that, ideally in the long run, we're looking at that as sort of, addressing retirement. Obviously retirement is part of, as we talked about with the fixed costs earlier, part of an issue that we have in 22 and beyond. And stabilization, obviously, to make the 21 budget work was the 400,000 that was used and then put back in. And so, I think those are conversations that as this comes into focus, we need to be prepared to use. And I think, to Tina's point and the point that obviously the FinCom felt comfortable with going into the 21 budget, it's something that we have in place, and stabilization based on policy, the CapEx based on policy, and the reserve fund that was in the 21 budget based on policy, we're all, healthy, right? And so I think we need to be factoring those in before looking at service cuts, but I think that's in line with the conversation we've had so far.
And just to be clear, nothing we've discussed tonight has involved service cuts, right? We're talking about just budget prep for next year. We're a long way from any discussion on service cuts.
Yeah, but I wouldn't also want to entertain using stabilization other than the money that we put aside for retirement that was sort of noted as such beforehand. I wouldn't want to use stabilization to increase services to the town if we weren't cutting services. Right. So I just want to make sure that that's not what was intended either.
Right. Okay, Michelle, you had a comment?
Yeah, two comments. One, I just wanted to remind everyone that one of the purposes of the stabilization was because we didn't know what was happening with stimulus money and COVID. And it's a one-time thing because of the great unknown of the second half of this fiscal year. It's not something that's ongoing. It's something that's a one-time, hopefully.
It's a bridge. That's what it's supposed to be.
It's a
That's what
bridge.
policy says.
And it's not a policy, it's not ongoing, it's a one-time thing because we don't know what's happening. I just want to remind everyone. And the second thing is about public safety. I also want to remind everyone that we only review budgets that have been approved. So public safety budgets are approved by the select board. We don't look at them until they're approved by the select board. If there are changes that need to be made, they should be made by the select board before they get to us.
Right, and that was my point earlier, was that they can make a request, and we can decide whether we have the money to support the request or whatever, but that's the process, right?
Right.
So, and that's the right process, right? As I said, because you have to, because we don't control the money, right? That's the key reason why we don't control the money.
It's a check and balance thing.
Exactly. So back to our original topic, what is the consensus on how we proceed? We could, again, if we want to say, generally speaking, we've been hesitant to not give them a target because we don't know, we get kind of scattershot when we do that, but we can, Travis is right here. We can convey to Travis, okay, you could give the department heads guidance that what we're going to be looking for is a level service budget. The salary piece will be handled later, and everybody should start thinking about level service and preparing a request that's level service with any known cost increases and any known adjustments. And then, again, a separate bucket for COVID related costs because we might have to add those in. So
I'm at level services, flat salary for now.
Well, as I said, I don't even want to say flat salary. What I want to say is we'll take care of the salary piece. We'll work with Travis to take care of it.
Whatever. But I mean, just prior year salary for the modeling purposes for now.
Yes.
We'll take care of the salary, level services, and with COVID set aside as a separate bucket for what they would think that COVID costs would be. I don't think it would be that great because honestly, I think a lot of that was spent already.
Right.
It's not as if we're increasing hours and such. I mean, there are certainly some departments, the health department and whatnot, might have something, but I wouldn't think that a normal department would have significant COVID costs, if you will.
Yeah. So what?
That's my own, and I'll shut up now.
Okay. So what about the other members? Is that what we want to do? Ben, go ahead.
Yes, I agree. That's pretty much just tell Travis, we're telling Travis that this is our intention. This is what we want. I mean, it's a weird year. So rather than us setting a percentage, understand this is what we want, level service, but we're going to we want to know specifically why certain things are increasing if you're increasing something. So, but leave it up to the department heads. I think we need to, the Parks and Rec are probably a little concerned because what's their summer going to be? Probably in the same situation as it was this year. And a lot of I think we'll probably be back to quasi-normal maybe at the beginning of the school year, but who's to say? So I agree.
Do you mind, Chair?
Go ahead, Travis.
So Parks and Rec just gives me a perfect example of since I've been here, I've heard this from numerous different departments and I've been working with a bunch of different groups that we need a better solution for managing fields. And so I think at some point, everybody is sort of under the agreement that doesn't mean increasing staff, especially benefited staff. We have a couple options. One would be, sort of outsourcing some of these things, putting a contract together, having somebody on a schedule, having somebody to manage that, whether it be DPW, Parks and Rec, or the facilities manager, which has that in year 2 or 3 of his job description, right? Another source would be potentially looking at seasonal work. That's how a lot of towns handle this, right? You end up not having the benefit package. You can have somebody work 50 hours a week for a certain period of time, not run into the issue of having them benefited, which obviously lowers your overhead. But either way, I think there are certain things that obviously departments have been looking at. Those types of things, I think, and if the description or the guidance from the FinCom is sort of level funded, don't ask for anything, I don't know that I won't be able to say, I want to hear those things. I need to know, and if they can't happen in 22, they can't happen, but I think we need to know about them. I mean, for an example, I was watching the COA meeting the other day, and they were talking about how a position was supported by the FinCom and the Select Board last year and then got cut because of COVID. they still are interested in that. Is that going to work in 22? Sitting here tonight, listening to this group, I would say, they wouldn't be encouraged. At the same point, does that mean that it shouldn't be on the radar? I don't know that that's true. Whether it gets in the 22 budget or not is sort of to be determined. But I think those things people need to understand how they should approach it, right? If
Right.
It's realistic that it's not going to get in, but that doesn't mean that we don't need to understand the impact of it not being in. What does that impact service level? We all understand it, and we have to make difficult decisions in 22. But those are the types of things I think. I just want to, the level service budget to me makes perfect sense because I deal with these budgets. To somebody else, it may not. They look for a 0 or a 1, and I understand that it gets a little messy depending on department. But
Right.
yeah, but
Well,
Travis,
well,
we
Travis,
want you to be doing that.
Yeah. I just want to be clear on that, right? Nobody is saying level funded. We're talking level service. That's the first thing. Okay. The second thing is, it's always possible. If you read our guideline document every year, we talk about things like efficiencies. Are there opportunities for efficiency improvements where it may cost us some money in the short term but has payback? Are there service expansions you'd like to consider? We want to hear all that stuff, right? In the sense that within reason, right? If somebody comes in and says, I want to hire 10 people, they're not going to get 10 people in a tough budget situation, right? But your example about the COA, right? That should be part of what they present to us. Say, here's our budget, here's our level service budget. And, again, they may say, here's what we're spending right now on COVID. We think we might have to spend if this continues. And by the way, we'd like to add in these areas. Departments do that. We do get requests like that on an annual basis where a department will say, we'd like to move somebody from, 20 to 30 hours or something. And we kind of keep a running list of all these things. And then when we get to formulating the budget, we look at what room we have to do it. And then we say, okay, can we support some of these? Which ones do we feel we can support? That's how Parks and Rec, for example, got the assistant director had hours added a couple of years ago for that very reason. They said, we're running the programs, we're needing the additional time, that we're making the money off it because the program, they can run more programs. So we supported it. So go ahead, Dan.
Yeah. And, look, your job is running all of these departments, right? Obviously the select board oversees it, but that's your job is, so create a list of all the wants and needs and then, bring them to the select board to vote on their top priorities. We talked about this before, there's another way that the select board, I think, can get more sort of control over their budgets and not sort of have us pick and choose things, is if they sort of put all of the budgets of which that they oversee together and say, this is sort of the pot of money that we, that will, if we do come up with a sort of a guideline, right, that we need, but instead of giving all departments, the same amount, we move some things around a little bit so that we can afford something extra for, or something bigger for one department. And I don't think that, everyone should speak for themselves, but if the dollars are the same at the end of the day, I don't think that there's anything that any of us would object to. And then if there are things above and beyond that, bring a list to us. And the schools do that every year. They have a list, millions of dollars long of requests and things that they would like. And, we see what we can do, every year. And, they have a sort of a prioritization list and we kind of go down it.
So I guess my only concern would be what Ken and Dan just said is not what I would have taken from the 25 minutes before that. So that's I think we can write this in a way that people are clear and we're all on the same page. I'm comfortable with that, right? Some of these things we want to know about and the realistic look of it is it's not going to fit in 22 potentially unless something drastically shifts. But I just want people to be aware that they should be putting this on the radar, because I think that, some of the feedback I've received is just what you mentioned, which is that the schools do it and then we didn't do it because we thought we were following guidelines, right? So
that's only because the select board isn't sort of put it all together and kind of done their own prioritization, so it just comes to us as like individual departments. And I would say I think it's actually very consistent with what we just said, because what I said is I want a level services budget from every department. That doesn't mean that they don't have on the side, hey, by the way, if there's extra money, this is what we'd like, or go to before the select board and say this is what we like, and then I would highly recommend the select board doesn't take a big item from each to then recommend to us, because then we're basically deciding which one of them, if we there's a limited dollars that there are, but that should all, everyone should ask. You can only be told no if you ask.
Right.
Travis,
But the actual budget given to us should be a level services budget.
I think it's really important, Travis, that you're involved with each of the budgets. Obviously, that you can be, because I think what you've described is what we've asked in the past for. But I don't think it rarely has it come to fruition except for the school. So it would be helpful for you to sort of dig in and understand more sort of what those needs and wants are and sort of what the priorities are. So I think that would be very beneficial.
Yeah. I mean, the key distinction, I think, Travis, is you can always ask, but we try to set expectations that correctly that, hey, you can ask for anything you want, but we don't want to see a budget that we know we can't fund, right? And that's why we always say, give us a level service budget to see where we are, because that's going to be our starting point, is to say, okay, to maintain town services where they are today, how much is it going to cost us? And then we look at things and say, do we have any margin? Are there other improvements we can make? Are there additions we can make elsewhere? That's the conversation, right? And I will tell you that I've had that conversation with some department heads that I've known over the years, where I've had that exact conversation, and I don't think they fully, I don't want to say they don't get it, but they kind of get it, but they feel like, okay, well, I'm not going to give you that because you're never going to fund it. And it's like, well, then they get mad that we didn't fund it. We're like, well, you never gave us a request to talk about, right? You never told us what you wanted, because you presumed that because we said money was tight, that if there was a little money extra, we might not have given it to you, right? And that's true, we might not have, but we can't even make a decision if we don't have the information in front of us, right? So I think that's a key takeaway, right? I think the consensus from what I'm hearing, and again, the membership can correct me if I'm wrong, is that we would like to see a level service budget, broken out COVID expenses, and then any service additions that you feel you want to ask for, go ahead and ask for them, but just recognize that it's a tight budget year, and that, depending on how those requests come out and where we end up on salaries and stuff like that, these things may not get recommended. But there's never a harm in bringing us a request and saying this is what we want, right? So, and as I said, I think the key, a kind of minor point that goes along with that, is prioritize things for the schools. Give us a list every year that says, if you can only fund X dollars, here's how we want you to allocate it. This, and this. They give us a detailed list every year, and we don't want to be in the business of saying, okay, we've got a big pool, let's decide what their intent was of what their top priority. We always ask for prioritization for that reason, so that if we sit there and say we got a little bit of extra money, or the numbers are coming in a little better than we expect, well, how can we adjust for those? Well, we want to go back and say, okay, what did they say their most important thing was of the three things they asked for? That kind of thing. So I agree entirely with Sue that I think that's you can help facilitate that process tremendously, Travis. Go ahead, Travis.
I'm comfortable with that. I think that sounds great. Do you mind if I take a complete right turn and talk about one thing on my revenue spreadsheet?
Yeah, go ahead.
So for the solar revenue, one of the conversations that I came in afterwards was on how to handle that. I think the way that the article had been written leading into annual town meeting kind of was convoluted. It was like a revolving fund that had a home rule. So I'm looking at how to best handle that. And I think it's one of the things that we're going to want to talk about leading into May. If the intention is to have it in general fund, I think that's one thing that we need to factor into the 22 budget. Probably not the entire extent of it, but a portion of it, which is in the hundreds of thousands of dollars range. Another thing would be coming up with a solution that makes more sense for the town with oversight than the revolving fund with the home rule idea. So that's just one thing I want to put on the radar. It's kind of going to run simultaneous to this conversation. If it turns out that the best course of action that the FinCom and the select board and everybody feels most comfortable with going into town meeting, to have it just run into the general fund as we do with sort of other sort of newer revenues like marijuana, that's fine. I mean, if that's the decision of the town, but if we're going to decide on a fund, it's going to enter the 22 conversation either way. One would be, if it was going to be a fund that we want to set up in May, we could then move the sustainability coordinator into a separate bucket, which would be this fund. And if it's going to be in general fund, then it's going to go into that local receipts, right? And we're going to have to come up with a number for that. I just want to throw it out there now because, I've discussed sort of some of the more mainstream ideas that I like, which is an enterprise fund. or a standard revolving fund, which doesn't have the home rule petition that sort of removes all oversight. But I just want to put that out there because I know I discussed it with some, but not with the whole group.
My concern would be building it into the operating budget because my understanding is that it has a terminus date. It's long, but it has a terminus date. One idea I sort of had is that until we have a sort of a better use for it, we use it to start funding the retirement. Until there's the definitive better plan for it. But it's just be that you can always kind of move in. If you found a project for it, you can always turn that off and try to use other funds to continue putting money into the retirement account. But
okay, Michelle, you have a comment?
How that money got there?
What did you say, Michelle?
Am I muted?
No, you're okay.
No.
Just quiet.
The phones, the money for the phones, and then everyone forgot that money was there, and then all of a sudden everyone got phone bills.
Oh, the gift account, yes. The gift account that we never knew about, yes.
So we don't want that to happen.
I'll fill you in on that one later, Travis. That whole thing. It'll be educational. So okay, so I think that Travis, you see where we're headed on this, right? So I think that you can start conveying to the department heads that that's kind of the framework we're going to be looking at, the way we want to approach it. I guess we will wait a couple more weeks and see if we get any insight. I mean, technically speaking, as I said, the governor has to, the Council of Elders has to meet at the beginning of January sometime. So, maybe I'll sit in on that meeting again if it's a virtual meeting and see if that gives us any insight as to what the state's thinking revenue-wise, right? Because ultimately it's going to come down to the revenue model the state uses for FY22. Obviously, they're going to presume some level of federal assistance, but I just want to see if they're predicting that even with the vaccine, even with recovery, right? Everybody knows the economy is not going to turn around overnight, right? So I'd be very curious to see what the state, forecasters are looking at in terms of, do they see, further revenue declines in FY22, or are they saying it's going to be, slight uptick from 21, but not close to where we were in 20? That's why I said, I think that'll give us a good insight as to where the state's going to head budget-wise. So, anybody else have any other comments? I'll after the meeting, I'll sit down with Travis and clean up the spreadsheet a little bit more, and then send it out to everybody so you can play with your own numbers and see how things look. So, okay. So if that's it, then that's it for the open session part of this meeting. We can, as you saw on our agenda, there was a request for executive session this evening, from which we will not return. And just to be clear for the verbal record that will be made, I will say that the executive session that we're going to enter into is to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining and or litigation, to conduct strategy sessions in preparation for negotiations with non-union personnel, and to consider the purchase, exchange, lease, or value of real property. And as I said, we will not return to open session following the conclusion of executive session. Do I have a motion to enter executive session?
So moved for the purposes stated.
Second.
Okay, this requires, as all these votes do, a roll call vote, so it's nothing special. Mr. Maxwell? Got on mute first.
Yes.
Mr. Whitaker?
Yes.
Ms. Zemer?
Yes.
Mr. Alfred?
Yes.
Mr. Murphy?
Yes.
Ms. Nersessian?
Yes.
And I vote yes. So from the public's perspective, that concludes the open session portion of the Finance Committee meeting for today, December 15th. As you just heard, we will likely be meeting again next in early January, though you'll see our posting when that occurs, because I haven't decided on the date just yet. But for tonight, we're done with open session. So thank you and good night.